Welcome to Build with Bitcoin. In today's episode, we speak with Lisa Neigut. Lisa is a well-respected Bitcoin developer and educator. She founded Base58 and Bitcoin++. Base58 is a Bitcoin protocol academy, and Bitcoin++ is a developer series conference that teaches people on what is happening at the Bitcoin protocol from a technical level. We hope you enjoy, and as a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only. Welcome to Build with Bitcoin. I'm co-host Israel Munoz, joined with co-host Lynn Bairstow. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Lisa Neigut. Lisa, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, y'all.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. And today it's a little bit of a different episode. We haven't done one like this before, but we've known Lisa for a while. She's really a presence in the whole Bitcoin community because she is probably the most well-known in terms of developer training and helping developers and engineers get into the Bitcoin space and get up to speed and become familiar with new tools and new developments on the Bitcoin protocol. So we're super excited about having this conversation today, especially for anyone who's interested in thinking about joining Bitcoin companies or shifting their engineering talents toward Bitcoin, or investors to understand, how you can ensure that there's talent available to produce the investors and founders to know where the best source of talent is would probably be from Lisa and some of her programs in terms of both educational programs and the workshops that she offers. So we're going to dive in. And Lisa, before we get started on exactly what you do with Base58 and the Bitcoin++ conference series, we love to start with the origin story. How did you get introduced to Bitcoin? And it's obviously become your entire life. I know you're very focused also on Lightning development, but would love to hear, how it all began for you.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. I was an engineer for a long time. I started as an Android dev. First company I worked at as an Android dev was Etsy. And at some point after about half a decade of working on Android apps, I decided I wanted to do something different. I applied at a bunch of different companies. The one that I ended up getting hired at was Cash App because they have a Java backend. So it's something that I could take the programming skills that I knew at Android and maybe apply them to something different. And it just so happened that the engineering team that was hiring or needed new headcount the day that I got onboarded at Cash App organization, which for those of you who aren't familiar, I think Cash App's only available in the US, is basically a peer-to-peer money service. Basically lets you send cash between yourself or friends very easily for low cost. It's run by Jack Dorsey, who these days is known as a big Bitcoin philanthropist, and very involved in the Bitcoin space. But when I joined, they had just started a Bitcoin team. So I got added as an engineer for the back end of the Bitcoin part of the application, which let you buy and sell Bitcoin. And at the time, I think you could send Bitcoin places, you couldn't deposit it yet. So I worked on that team. This was 2018. I worked on that team for a couple of months. And then I managed to I applied for basically a position at Blockstream to work on the Lightning network, and ended up getting hired by them within like 5 or 6 months of getting into Bitcoin as an engineer. And went to work learning C and basically being a spec engineer for Lightning at Blockstream, and did that for about 5 years. I still help out occasionally with the Core Lightning project. I'm still kind of part-time at Blockstream, and keep up with Lightning spec stuff that I worked on, but pivoted into doing more community-focused stuff such as education, working on writing a book, which is kind of how the education nonprofit project started, and then running a conference series. It's most of my time these days.
Just diving a little deeper into that. So you came to Bitcoin through engineering, but was there something about the protocol that just really attracted you? That was, I don't know if it was more the challenge of programming or the fact that it was something new that hadn't really been done before. So it gave kind of an interesting opportunity. Or did you, I know that you do work all over the world. So was there a macroeconomic or a financial part of it that you also saw? So I'm just kind of curious about, we all come to it in it rings a bell in a certain aspect based on where we're coming from. And I think both Israel and I are both a little bit more, we came to it more from the technical side as well, but would love to hear what was it that was exciting about Bitcoin protocol for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I read Mastering Bitcoin the first week on the job, which makes sense, right? It's like you have to know how the protocol works. And for me, it was just like, it was really exciting and a new way of doing things. I think one thing that's kind of hard to understand if you're not in tech or very technical is that Bitcoin is legitimately a new way of doing things. Like it's legitimately groundbreaking and revolutionary in terms of figuring out how blockchain should work. So that was like, I don't know, for whatever reason, I was like, this is really cool and exciting. It also had a lot of new and interesting, I think Satoshi is the first engineer that I think really nailed both protocol design along with incentive design. So the way that he managed to figure out, um, basically like how the mining stuff would work and really understood like game theory and people's incentives and tying it to burning of a real world resource like energy is just really interesting. My background is like not technical. I didn't do computer science in undergrad. I'm mostly self-taught programmer. Um, but I did study I did study business. So I took some like finance classes and that sort of thing, kind of get a little bit of exposure to game theory. And I don't know, it just really was like, wow, this is like groundbreakingly cool. Um, and I think that being able to, transact in a peer-to-peer way without having any intermediaries is a really important part of civil liberties. So it's just, kind of this perfect mix of like, wow, this is like nerd sniping me. It's so interesting and different, and all the different little protocols that are built into Bitcoin to make it work are really cool and interesting and like new things I've never seen before. Along with like, wow, the guy who put this together really thought through like the real world to digital connection in a way that I don't think any protocol designer has figured that out. And, it's like really groundbreaking that way, along with like, oh, this like solves a real problem that we're going to need a solution for as like, digital data collection and, I don't know, like the expectations of privacy that we have, I think, in society have gone down a lot over the last few decades. And I can only see that getting worse as the future goes forward. And so having a protocol that's actually a peer-to-peer value exchange like Bitcoin is a really important thing to like maintain if we want to remain, independent, sovereign, civil, members of like a civil society, I think.
So Lisa, you mentioned mastering Bitcoin. I remember I kind of skimmed through that book, and it's not an easy read. Was that part of the kind of inspiration for what eventually got you started with Base 58, or why do you think these educational technical courses are so important?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that mastering Bitcoin is too superficial and doesn't go deep enough and isn't practical enough as an engineer in terms of getting you hands on and to like actually touching the protocol and doing stuff. So like I started reading a textbook, I've then managed to keep distracting myself, so I haven't finished it. But the thing, like, yeah, so I kind of see mastering Bitcoin as like a prerequisite to the sort of stuff that I'm working on. One of the reasons for that is that mastering Bitcoin is really like a high level overview. I mean, it's not very high level, but like an overview over the entire protocol versus the kinds of education stuff that we do in Base 58 or like the two classes that I have online right now that you can sign up for. They sort of start at the level of like, okay, I'm not going to explain to you how blocks work. I'm not going to explain to you like any of the like monetary issuance aspects of Bitcoin. Instead, we're going to focus on one particular aspect of the Bitcoin protocol, and we're going to get really familiar with it. And you're going to touch it, and you're going to build it with your hands, and you're going to like really understand how Bitcoin transactions work. So it's really just kind of like this focused dive on, okay, as a Bitcoiner, the thing that you personally are going to have the most interactions with is going to be Bitcoin transactions, right? You're going to be making them as a developer, like the thing that you have the most like ability to change is like what scripts go into a Bitcoin transaction. So how you lock up your coins. So the classes that I wrote, all that they focus on like initially is how do you write scripts to lock up Bitcoin transactions? And it's like a hands-on class where you actually are building transactions like bit by bite, like basically like make you do it. At least in the classes I do it like by hand. So it's like here you can write a Bitcoin transaction by hand that will be accepted by the network. And so you can basically see how the sausage is made around transactions. So I wouldn't say it's like it has a different, I think like the kind of education that at least the initial stuff, the initial class that Base 58 came out with is very focused on making you a productive, like person who's interacting with Bitcoin transactions. And that's like the concentration or focus. It also has a lot of like, okay, we're going to like learn how to use Bitcoin Core to build transactions. And so it's more of a like hands-on implementation. Let's really look at how this protocol is put together and learn all the parts. More so than, I think mastering Bitcoin is like, here's a in-depth survey of all the pieces of what makes Bitcoin.
Maybe we just take a step back here and just talk about what is Base 58. What is your offering of classes? I know it's a way for developers and engineers to learn more about the Bitcoin protocol. How new to Bitcoin do you need to be? How experienced of an engineer or developer do you need to be? And classes are online, in person, what levels? So maybe just kind of give a high level overview of what Base 58 is, including where the name came from.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Base 58 is a nonprofit that's engineering school is what we call ourselves. In the past, I've done like online classes. I've done in-person classes. We've covered like a range of topics like transactions, which is kind of our developer first, like, if you're looking to get into Bitcoin, we'll like start here. We'll teach you how transactions work. Right now, it's been through a couple like iterations, I would say. Right now, it's basically we're focusing on being an online, almost like self-service class. So we have 2 classes up on Udemy. They're targeted at developers. I like to say you don't really have to know how to program to do all the classes. It's a lot about how Bitcoin works. We use some programming, we use Python as a tool to be able to understand and inspect data and information that goes into Bitcoin transactions. But overall, it's the thing about Bitcoin as a protocol is there really is nothing else like it. So when you're coming to it, it's like, okay, do I need to know how like all these other things work? It's like, well, if you have a good understanding of how data gets encoded in computer languages, that's probably very useful information. But if you don't understand it, maybe you'll learn it in class. I think we've had some people that aren't engineers yet that come through, do a really great job, and then go on to like, further study more about programming so they can become better Bitcoin engineers. We've had people that are longtime engineers who come through and really enjoy it. I think it's really, how in depth you want to get in terms of like inspecting and interacting with Bitcoin transactions. I think having an engineering mindset though is probably the biggest prerequisite for it. You asked where the name came from. So the Base 58 name, that's actually a Bitcoin protocol that Satoshi invented as basically it's a way that you can take a Bitcoin address and when you write it down on paper, so like language or encoding as we call it in computer science, the encoding that you're using to write down the Bitcoin address is something called Base 58. So this is kind of old Bitcoin. These days we use something called Batch 32. So for SegWit and Taproot addresses, maybe you're not sure what that is. These are some soft fork upgrades that have gotten added to Bitcoin over the last decade. We no longer use Base 58 for Bitcoin addresses, but if you ever get a Bitcoin address that starts with the number 3 or the number 1, that is a Base 58 encoded Bitcoin address.
Lisa, just as far as an overview of what you've done with Base 58 to date. I mean, how many students have, gone through the course, and maybe just geography wise? I mean, where are you seeing these interested developers coming from?
This is a great question. So I used to do the classes online. I think we've gotten, and I get this, maybe over 100, 200 students through the online class that like I actually taught. It's much smaller numbers of in-person classes when I was doing in-person classes almost, it was almost 2 years ago. But the online Udemy class, we've had over 1,000, maybe 2,000 students go through it at this point. And they come from all over the world. So I did like a class giveaway when I launched the second half of the class last year. And I think we had people from Argentina, the US, we had a big number coming from Vietnam that signed up. Really, they're like, people are interested in learning how Bitcoin works anywhere in the world. It is truly like a global protocol, right? It's a global payment system. And so you do see interest from devs and people like basically internationally.
One of the things that Israel and I like to talk about a lot on Filled with Bitcoin is how there tends to be a misconception that Bitcoin is, it's the original blockchain technology in crypto, but there's a lot of confusion in the general space about crypto, digital assets, Bitcoin, and why, and we try and educate on why Bitcoin is so different. And so one of the misconceptions is that, a lot of these other quote unquote Web3 projects have come into existence because they say they're solving a problem that Bitcoin can't solve. But there's a lot of innovation that actually happens on the Bitcoin blockchain. And I'm sure you as an educator, I mean, you're working with the developers who are advancing the protocol to enable more more transactions or layer twos, certainly with Lightning. Can you speak a little bit about the evolution of Bitcoin as a technology, as a protocol, and why it actually can provide the innovation that we need in this peer-to-peer value transfer?
Build with Bitcoin is a proud affiliate partner of River. River is a financial services company that allows you to purchase, sell, and transfer your Bitcoin all through a great suite of products, high security standards, and as of recent, even allowing you to earn a Bitcoin yield on your US dollar cash deposits. For a personalized onboarding experience, go to partner.river.com/buildwithbitcoin.
Yeah, so I think what I've seen a lot of is, so Bitcoin is, I like to call it the granddaddy of all blockchains. This is another thing when people like, for a while, I'd go to classes and stuff and people would be like, why are you learning about Bitcoin? That's old. Nothing interesting happens in Bitcoin. And it's like, well, every other chain is based on Bitcoin, whether they want to or not. They like took design decisions that Bitcoin made and like changed them in one direction or another. So I feel like it's very useful, at least for me, to like understand kind of where you're coming from whenever you're studying other projects. I think that people make a mistake in thinking that like, what am I trying to say? So, I mean, it's when we started about motivations of why I work on Bitcoin, right? It's mostly around like being able to pay someone else with a value, right? Like value exchange. When you start getting into projects outside of Bitcoin, I feel like you'll find very quickly that they've changed the goal or what their design goals are. You start getting into things like, oh, we're going to make finance, which is like financialization. So you can rehypothecate things, you can make loans, you can, I don't know, you have an asset and then you issue a token for the value of the asset. You can do things that aren't simply like medium of exchange. So things that aren't simply, I have a valuable asset and I want to give it to you in exchange for some goods or services, right? So like a lot of the things that like I focused on and I spent my career working on are in the medium of exchange. Like, and I think Bitcoin far and by like a long shot is one of the best things for doing medium of exchange. And the big reason for that has to do with, I think, just like the dominance of Bitcoin in terms of being a store of value. So I think there is like this interplay between like, it is the granddaddy of blockchains. It was the first one that figured out store of value over the long term. It's got like solid fundamentals, I think, on the money, like what is money side. And it didn't, I think it has this like singularity purpose. Like this is what we're doing. We're like to some extent savings technology, right? And then adding on top of that things like Lightning that make it such that you can, and there's some other really cool layer two protocols that are coming out, like Art. Mercury layer is a state chain, which is really cool. I think that they are onto something really interesting there. There's another one that I can't remember. Oh, the eCash stuff is interesting, depending on how you feel about custody. So there's a lot of like interesting new protocols on Bitcoin that help you take this like monetary value and exchange it with other people. When you start getting into other blockchains and other projects, I find that it's really difficult to kind of get the sweet spot of what Bitcoin has in terms of like, oh, this protocol both has like this great monetary store of value backing behind it, as well as like great protocols for exchanging value amongst people who hold it. And that's just like, so when you go to other chains, they're like, we're going to solve some problems that Bitcoin can't solve. It's like, okay, well, that's great, but Bitcoin solves the problems that it solves really well. And so I think that, I don't know, I think that there's like I think it's very difficult for other blockchains to, I don't think there's ever going to be another project that does what Bitcoin does as well as Bitcoin does it. And maybe they're like doing other things, but I think one of the challenges you see with projects and other blockchains is like product market fit. Like, is that thing or like whatever problems that they're setting out to solve a problem that they're going to be able to like, have an addressable market of a lot of people that have that problem that blockchain will solve. I don't know. So that's like a long-winded answer, but
I think you would do a great job of kind of laying out the path that Bitcoin as a protocol is taking, Lisa. Because I mean, from my point of view, I think we're finally getting to the point where it's, I think maybe moving past the store of value use case, let's say, and it kind of has to grow through that path, right? From my point of view, it had to establish first the store of value, and then now we can see all this innovation going on as it kind of moves towards the unit of account, medium of exchange routes. And what I see missing in the other projects of other blockchains and tokens is I just think if you don't establish that store of value component first, you're just not going to have that robust innovation happening in that those second and third layers of the protocol that you're describing.
And moving into the second part of what you do, Lisa, with the Bitcoin Plus Plus conferences, part of this is because there are so many evolutions of the Bitcoin protocol or different innovations that are occurring on it. These conferences that you put together are a way to bring developers together and discuss these and kind of work through them and have hackathons and hands-on experience. Can you describe a little bit about the origin of the conference series and what sorts of discussion points you tackle and who goes to them?
Definitely, yeah. So the Bitcoin Plus Plus, like as a project, was started as an opportunity for people who had been through Base58 classes or, just like all the smart devs that I knew that were doing interesting things at Blockstream that I felt like didn't have a real audience or real understanding outside of the organization about what they were doing or working on. I was like, okay, I'm going to bring together, and I think the first conference I kind of focused on getting all the Bitcoin educators, so people like D++ and Jimmy Song and Justin Moon, who had been doing an online blockchain class for a while. A lot of them were in Austin. Actually, I think everyone was in Austin at the time, self-included with Base58. It's like, we're going to all get together and we're going to do a conference, and the conference, we're going to have workshops, we're going to have a hackathon. We're going to bring in all the people that are doing interesting, cool stuff in Bitcoin. This was also, I want to say 2021, 2022. Yeah, it's 2022. And I feel like the narrative then was like, oh my God, all these smart people are leaving Bitcoin because like, they're great. There's nothing interesting happening in Bitcoin. All the cool stuff happens other places. And I wanted to try as much as possible and make people who were working in Bitcoin at the time, one, realize that there were cool and interesting things happening. And two, that like there were cool and interesting people that they could work with on projects in the space. So we did the first one in Austin in June. We did it the same week as Consensus, which is a big like blockchain conference that was in Austin at the time. I think they've moved elsewhere. Yeah, so we did it the same week as consensus. And then pretty quickly after that, I decided I wanted to do it in Mexico City, which is kind of funny. So that's where you are, Lynn. I wanted to do it in Mexico City because it was close to Austin, and I don't know. I don't know why. I was just like, no, we're gonna go to Mexico 6 months later. Um, and so we did our second ever event within the first year, 6 months after the first one, and we did it in Mexico. It was our first international conference. I picked a theme. Every Bitcoin plus plus has a theme. I don't know why. And maybe everyone loves a good theme party, right? We did the theme of that one was privacy. And one of the things that I learned by doing that in Mexico was that a lot of people didn't want to come to the US or couldn't come to the US because of the work that they were doing. They just didn't feel comfortable coming onto US soil for whatever reason. And so the fact that I was holding a privacy conference focused in Mexico meant that I could get a lot of really cool, interesting people to come participate in my events. And so that kind of gave me this idea that was like, okay, Bitcoin plus plus needs to be global because there's interesting people doing interesting Bitcoin things all over the world. And I want to hang out with them. Like my friends are like, I really like all the people that are working in this space. I really like getting them together to talk about what they're doing. It's really fun to watch people make new friends and new projects grow out of it. Bitcoin plus plus, I think, has been the venue for a lot of new announcements of what's happening in the space. We've had new companies start out of the hackathons at Bitcoin plus plus. There's a project called Prisms, which uses Full 12, so it's pay a bunch of people at the same time that started out of Bitcoin plus plus hackathon. Mutiny Wallet started out at a Bitcoin plus plus hackathon. There's been some really cool simplicity implementation stuff that came out. Anyways, things like that. So there's like a lot of really cool stuff about seeing people come together and work on Bitcoin protocols and projects and share what they know. Over the past 3 years, we've now had 7 conferences internationally, so all over the world. We did our first one in Latin America last year. We were in Argentina. We're going to be back in Latin America, this time in Brazil, in about 4 weeks. So we'll be there in late February. And this year I got a little crazy. We'll see how well we do, but I'm planning on doing 6 conferences this year all over the world. So they'll be in 6 different countries. Guess that's one every 2 months. I don't know. We'll see if we can make that happen.
And you have different themes for each of those conferences. So somebody could select a conference. Do you tend to find that people go to one or they go to all of them? So maybe somebody would go based on the theme or based on the geographic proximity?
All of those things, exactly. Yeah. So I think the fact that they are themed make it easier for people to decide like which ones they want to go to and which ones they want to maybe stay at home. And so the Brazil event is going to be our first like mostly hackathon focused one. So really leaning into like workshops on how to build on Bitcoin, as well as having lots of space and time for working together and like just working on cool projects. And then everyone will get an opportunity to show what they've worked on at the end. So we'll have a fun little presentation section. And some prizes. After after Brazil, we're going to be in Austin, which is like kind of our flagship conference. That'll be in May. And that one, the focus this year, though, I think we're definitely going to have different topics because it seems like a lot of people just want to come to the Austin event. That one's going to be focused on mempool and mining pool stuff. So transaction relay, block building, like how do we get transactions to people, like how do we assure fair access to getting your transaction mined. I think that, I like picking topics that I feel like it's the right time to have interesting conversations about. So I have a good hope that we'll have some productive and interesting conversations around block building and transaction relay in Austin this May. After that, I've got a break in the summer and then a whirlwind fall. We're hoping to have the first Bitcoin plus plus ahead of the Honey Badger conference in Riga, which is in Latvia. That one will be focused on privacy and like freedom because, you can't really have freedom without privacy. Then we'll be in Istanbul in September, talking about all the Bitcoin scaling stuff. So all the new layer 2 projects, and hopefully have a good section on how the zero knowledge proof stuff might be coming to Bitcoin and what that would look like. So focusing more on some of the more new layer 2 sidechain projects and stuff. Istanbul's a fun place for that as a joke because it has a lot of bridges, like bridging east and west. a lot of layer 2 projects need to build bridges to Bitcoin. So we'll be in Istanbul talking about bridging Bitcoin to the future. In October, we'll be in Berlin. This is like another favorite city of mine. I think this will be our 3rd year in Berlin. And we'll be talking about Lightning. So hopefully getting all the Lightning people together to talk about what's new in Lightning, and bringing in application developers, really kind of leaning into the idea of programmable payments, I think, too. And then the last event of the year that we're planning is going to be our first Asia event. It'll be in Taipei. And looking forward to talking about sovereignty and maybe multi-sig and ways that you can really have sovereignty through building on Bitcoin.
Well, the global reach of the conference is amazing, Lisa. I mean, congrats, and I think you're definitely filling a big void there for the developer community, and the community building in person is just so important. I think, I have a couple questions for you, Lisa. First, are you seeing more at your Bitcoin plus plus conferences? Are you seeing more of the broader crypto or other blockchain communities starting to participate more on the Bitcoin protocol stack?
That's a good question. Yeah. So I feel like it's been small, like it's been kind of slow, but like last year in Austin, we did get some people that were like, I work on the Ethereum core team, or like funded by the Ethereum Foundation, work on the Ethereum protocol. That they were really fun, and are like, I work on doing Solana hacker houses. I wanted to see what Bitcoin plus plus is like up to. One of the things that was really fun about meeting them or having them come participate is how excited they were about all the cool stuff happening in Bitcoin. I think one of the sentiments that you hear is like, oh, I had no idea Bitcoin was doing all this cool stuff. But like the narrative outside of, Bitcoin macro, maxis, whatever online is like, oh, it's all a bunch of like old boomer, that's boomer Bitcoin. Bitcoin is boomer protocols. There's nothing cool happening there. So it was fun to be like, okay, like, I'm going to make an event where people come together and talk about cool stuff on Bitcoin. And then people show up and they're like, wow, you guys exist. It's just kind of like a fun thing to see.
Yeah. I would imagine we're kind of at the point where that will continue, which is great. I mean, I think I'm sure they bring some fresh perspectives as well. But that kind of takes me to the second question. So there's this kind of discussion around how Bitcoin should continue upgrading, to call it that, via soft forks, et cetera, in the future. There's I think two sides to the discussion. Basically, leave it alone. It's good at preserving purchasing power and being a store of value, and that alone is going to change so many things in the world and the economy, all that. And then there's the other side, which is no, we should keep innovating. And there's, I'm simplifying it. There's quite a bit of middle ground there, but just high level, where do you stand on how Bitcoin should scale and innovate?
I think it's one of those things where I've been a little disappointed about the dialogue and discussion that people have been having about what they want, how they want to see Bitcoin change. I think when you look at how the Bitcoin protocol works, especially on the script side, I think there's some definite improvements that we could make. There's this big project that Rusty Russell's working on called Great Script Restoration, which is really about like, okay, let's go back to first principles, engineering principles. And as an engineer, let's look at what's currently possible with Bitcoin script. And again, for those of you who aren't really familiar with like, what is Bitcoin script? Why does it matter? This is how you lock up Bitcoin and how you say who can spend this Bitcoin next, right? So it's really about how you give permission or authorization for Bitcoin to be spent. Really depends on what's written into the script that you like attach to those Bitcoins, so to speak.
Build with Bitcoin is proud to be a partner and supporter of the upcoming Plan B Forum El Salvador. From January 30th to the 31st, the brightest lights in Bitcoin and freedom technology will be coming together for inspiring talks and the opportunity to meet other like-minded people. Speakers include Blockstream's Adam Back, Paolo Ardanino of Tether, Lightning Labs' Elizabeth Stark, and Samson Mao of Jan3, among many others, including myself. The forum will have 2 stages in Spanish with bilingual translation available throughout. So join us for the best Bitcoin conference in LATAM. When you use the code BUILDWITHBitcoin, you get 10% off of your peer tickets that start at just $99. Visit planb.sv for complete information and to register. We'll see you soon in El Salvador, Bitcoin country.
So Rusty's kind of looked, Rusty's like a really amazing engineer. I think he's definitely one of the best, like deep thinkers about protocols in this space. And he looked at what everyone is like proposing to do for, Bitcoin script proposals. And he like said, okay, like what about these proposals, is like a reflection of what we're missing in script currently, right? And if we went back to the drawing board with script, what would we want to add or remove such that when we're considering changes or adding new script things in the future, we can build on top of like a more solid foundation than what we have currently. That's the kind of thinking that I like to see when people talk about soft forks or like, what we need to do or add or change to Bitcoin, is really like this deep thinking about like, okay, like what basic building blocks do we want as both developers as well as Bitcoiners that gives us like both the maximum freedom to decide what kind of permissions I'm going to put on my coins and able to be spent, as well as like making sure that there's no tragedy of the commons where we've added a Bitcoin script that for reasons of like how much work it takes to compute who's allowed to spend those coins, you're not creating an undue burden on the rest of the network, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like an interesting balance, I think, between, in a civil society, how do you give people maximum freedom, but also make sure that they don't encroach on anyone else's ability to exercise their own freedoms, and it's interesting, I think, to see, this isn't something I feel like people really talk about when they talk about what they want in script, but I think you could definitely make a comparison in some of the in-depth stuff around like what should we do, what should we change. So I think I end up on the point where I'm like, yeah, I think that script could give Bitcoiners more flexibility and more expressivity around how they want their coins to be locked up. So when you write a Bitcoin script about like, in order to spend my Bitcoin, it must be Tuesday on the 3rd month of the year. No, that kind of like expressivity around like, when can I spend my Bitcoin? Who can spend it? We can do, I think, a much better job with it. But I think that the way that we go about it, I think it would be great to kind of consider the sort of thinking that Rusty's putting into it, where we really, build a solid platform if we're going to make changes for, any sort of additional like stuff we'd want to do on top of it.
Lisa, all this development and innovation and people who are interested in building on it, just shifting a little bit more to a pragmatic approach to it. So clearly there must be companies that are hiring or opportunities on the developer space. And it was interesting. Our last conversation was with Alan Farrington of Axiom, and he made the observation, that he hates to define a space for his fund of what they're interested in looking at, because his perspective is that eventually all companies, just like all companies are now internet companies, that all companies will have Bitcoin integrated into the Bitcoin protocol, integrated somehow into their business. So we're seeing this with like Anchor Watch with insurance, and capital markets are integrating more. But as of today, like when you're talking to developers, what opportunities are present, or what do you see the landscape being for both companies that are interested in that and developers?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of organizations, most of them tend to be side chains or new layer 2 projects they're the ones that I've seen that have been able to get the most in terms of funding, and like, you can't hire without funding. So like, I think a lot of projects that are focusing on scaling Bitcoin, both in use cases. So like, let's like make Bitcoin lending possible, or let's figure out a way to build a side chain where you can do more interesting smart contracts with Bitcoin as the the liquidity that you're using to do things on top of. Those projects seem to be the ones that have done the best in terms of pitching to VCs, and without VC money, a lot of new you really just don't get new engineering positions. So yeah, I feel like most of the growth these days is really happening on the layer 2 level, or like, kind of one step removed from Bitcoin core protocols. The other project that I feel like is like is doing the most in terms of like putting money into the development of actual protocols. There've been new layer 2s developed. So the eCash ecosystem is getting a lot of funding. I'm really excited about eCash. I think that that's going to be just an incredible experience for the majority of people that want to use digital payments. I'm very, very bullish on eCash. So eCash has seen a lot of growth from the OpenSets Foundation is like a nonprofit that I'm on the board of. They've been giving grants out to Bitcoin developers and Nostr developers, which is a slightly different protocol, for the last, I want to say, 2 years now. And so I think that's been like a really big opportunity for developers getting in the space. But yeah, I think it's now more than ever, I feel like there's more opportunities for developers in Bitcoin across a wider range of companies than ever. And I'm excited to see kind of where, if, with every bull run, I feel like we get new money coming into the space. I'm really curious to see if that'll also bring in more VC money targeted at helping, entrepreneurs and people building solutions on Bitcoin, which then maybe will create more dev jobs.
Well, Lynn and I have been, focusing on that specific sector, and we definitely see that happening. I mean, I think it's going to continue growing, and we are seeing it growing. You have lots of the currently established VCs already kind of launching their funds 2 or 3. There's new entrants, so it's exciting to see the kind of feedback loop that you're starting to get in the entrepreneurial and startup space. And to an aspiring engineer or current engineer who has been aware of the Bitcoin space before, Lisa, but just has been hesitant to actually get involved, what would you say to those people, or what advice would you give?
Come to Bitcoin plus plus. I feel like I one of the things that I think is really true about any ecosystem, or like any community or like open source project, and Bitcoin is no exception, is that you need to meet people in the space and get to know them and see what they're working on. I think that tends to give you like a much deeper relationship to what's going on in the space, as well as like, you build friendships. So you like friends and communities and connections, or how you find jobs, or how you find a good spot to slot yourself in to contribute to the protocol. It's hard to know what opportunities there are for work, both in open source projects, which definitely need help and are always looking for new contributors, and they do a really good job of showing up at Bitcoin plus plus to try and find people, as well as people that are building projects, etc., or new companies, that kind of thing. So if you're a VC, maybe who's looking to get more involved in the space, come to Bitcoin plus plus and see what people are building and what kind of hackathon projects we're getting. If you're a dev and you want to meet new people or find a project, come and maybe find a hackathon team to contribute to, make some new friends, kind of thing. We've got plenty of opportunities this year all over the globe, so hopefully one of them will be close to someone who wants to come work on a project. Yeah, that'd be my advice.
Kind of talking about that, about who comes to it. I mean, it might be intimidating for some. I mean, if you're a company and you want to kind of explore Bitcoin and add it into it, or a VC or an investor, an angel investor that says, hey, this is the infrastructure that's going to power the future, I want to learn more about it. It's appropriate for them to come. And I think you also have sponsorship levels. Who are your typical sponsors? And because I'm sure it's just a fantastic way to get in front of the top developers and show what you're doing or what you're interested in, and attract talent, which is, in an emerging technology, is the most important thing, is making sure that you've got the top talent available to help you build. So talk to us about who are your sponsors, who would be appropriate to be a sponsor, and if you have any opportunities along those lines.
Yeah, definitely. So we're currently doing a big attempt to get sponsors in the door for our upcoming year of conferences. We've seen a lot of our sponsors tend to be exactly what you're saying, Lynn. They're people that really want to get their brand out in front of the developers, or really want to show off what kind of great engineering team they have internally already. So it's a great opportunity to come, meet new builders in the space, or like show off, here's the new protocol that we're working on, and really showcase that in front of a audience that really understands what you're working on. I think one thing that we heard from our sponsors, kind of depending, is it can be really difficult to find really good talent, or to even find like an audience that really understands what you're doing and what you're contributing to the space. And this is a great opportunity to meet that, figure that out, see that for yourself.
Oh, Lisa, you're just known as like the person in the Bitcoin space, and D++ and Dulce from, in the Spanish speaking side, but there are, very few people are really leading the charge in terms of developer education and developer community building, which I think is, to your point, is super important. And I know Austin is a big hub for that, but, just talking to on an entrepreneurial level, how do you balance your time, and what kind of, are there other volunteers that you need, or support that maybe people who are interested in getting involved that could support your efforts? How do you manage all of this great work that you're doing, and can you use any help?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely could use help. We have volunteers. We need volunteers for every conference. You get a free ticket in exchange for helping us like run check-in, or make sure that our live stream equipment works. They're fun jobs, I promise. So I can pass that volunteer. I don't know if you guys have links and stuff, but we have a sign up form, so we can pass that to you. So anyone who wants to volunteer. Also, always looking for people with interesting projects who want to come talk. So if you've got a interesting take, or you have a open source Bitcoin project that you think might be a good fit for one of our events this year, would really love to hear about your project. We don't accept everyone. I tend to be quite picky about what kind of projects get stage time. But yeah, that would be some really great ways to get involved, I think. Trying to think what else we've got. Signing up for classes and taking classes is a good way to help us. Like, that sounds weird, but more students are sending, if you have a friend in your family or someone do you think maybe would be get a lot of value out of learning about Bitcoin, either through an online class or coming to a conference? Just let them know that we exist, and that we're definitely a doorway, I like to think, into the wider Bitcoin ecosystem.
We'll be sure to share all those links and include them in there. And then you're pretty busy as it is, but will you be speaking at any other conferences, or are there best ways for people to kind of stay connected with you and what you're doing? Do you have a mailing list on the conference schedule?
We have a Twitter account that's BTC++, spelled out PLUS. That's a great place to follow along. Or and then Base58 BTC is our other Twitter account. So those are great places to keep up with us. We also have a Discord channel for Bitcoin++ and for Base58, which I think you might be able to find on the website. I should actually go check that. Yeah, I think those are good places to stay to date. Then you can also follow me on Twitter. I tend to tweet out a bunch of stuff, not just about my project, but I'm at Nifty9.
And maybe it's linked directly to what you just mentioned, Lisa. But lastly, if someone's interested maybe in the content, but can't attend the Bitcoin Plus Plus conference, I mean, what's the best way to maybe get a summary of what was covered, or to just kind of follow it, maybe from a distance?
Yeah, so we live stream everything to YouTube and to Twitter. So you can, I think, like all of our past conference talks, as many of them as we were able to record, are getting posted to our YouTube. I think we're currently going through our backlog for the last year. But yeah, so if you can follow us on YouTube, I think it's also BTC++ spelled out. You can see what we've talked about at past conferences, the kinds of speakers that we've had and topics that we've covered. should be a really good overview, I think, of what's been going on at Bitcoin Plus Plus the last few years.
Great. Well, I mean, thanks for the time, Lisa. And you're definitely having a big impact in the Bitcoin community. You're very knowledgeable and approachable. So I'm sure many people appreciate what you're working on.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. And we just want to encourage any companies that want to support Lisa's work in terms of sponsorship for these conferences. It's a great way to get a front row seat to what's happening in terms of the innovation on Bitcoin protocol, and also the top talent. That's, these are going to be the stars if you kind of compare it to the AI space and in a technology realm. That, what's happening in Bitcoin is just so exciting. And these are the people who are really driving the innovation in it today. So thank you, Lisa. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Al. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Build with Bitcoin podcast. If you found benefit in what you heard in this episode, we'd truly appreciate it if you would like, share, or leave a comment on whichever platform you're listening, as this helps others find us, which is especially important for a new podcast. And as a reminder, our content is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not to be considered investment advice or a recommendation to invest in any company or asset mentioned in the podcast. Build with Bitcoin is a proud affiliate partner of River, a full-service, 100% reserve custody, Bitcoin-only financial services company. For your next Bitcoin purchase, use our exclusive link, partner.river.com/buildwithbitcoin. Thank you sincerely for being a part of the Build with Bitcoin community.